Now, today we have a lot of athletes. They do a lot of things. Like Donovan Mitchell's with the Cavs now. He does a lot of great things for New York. Myles Garrett's in Cleveland. He does a lot of things art-wise in Cleveland. Of course, there's LeBron, because I'm here in Akron. He has the I Promise School. But the one thing I wish all these guys kind of did was a Black Economic Union, because that was very crucial in creating economic development for Black businesses, which is actually as needed now as it was back then.
And it was such an interesting idea. And even though it didn't take off or last, and this was much to Jim Brown's chagrin, take root with the next generation of athletes after him, which I believe is the reason why Jim Brown over the next decades and decades would always have very dismissive, contemptuous things to say about athletes and politics. Because his attitude, all that was rooted in the fact that he was able to form the Black Economic Unions. And what the Black Economics Unions was a coming together of athletes who at that time, even though they didn't make nearly the salaries they should have been making, made enough to be able to seed Black businesses, SEED seed, in cities around the country. And so, like, fast forward to today, for example, like Myles Garrett would be in the Black Economic Union of Cleveland, for example. You know, I'm saying the first name that comes to mind, CJ Stroud would be drafted into being part of the Economic Union in Houston. You know, it's like, if that's where you were, that's where you put your money down and you help small businesses. And keep in mind, the Black Economic Union was a for-profit enterprise. It was not meant to, and this has to do with Jim Brown's relationship to capitalism, which we can talk about too, or what he described as green power, which he saw as the method towards Black liberation. He was about building up that green power. And even though the Black Economic Unions did not take root, I would make the case to you, Kevin, that without the BEU, you don't get the revolt of the Black athlete in the late part of the 1960s. It just doesn't happen. Jim Brown laid that groundwork that we don't have to accept the crumbs, and we can be forward thinking about not just our own situation, but about the community. So you don't get the Black Athletes Revolt without the BEU, and without the Black Athletes Revolt, without question, you don't get Curt Flood, the challenging for free agency, the opening up of millions and millions of dollars for billions of dollars for generations of athletes, Black, white, brown, what have you. That, you know, you think about prominent white, you think about someone like Brett Favre. Like, Brett Favre should be sending checks to the Jim Brown family. It's like all athletes benefited from what Jim Brown was able to do and from what Black athletes were able to do in the late 60s and early 70s. So that's the legacy of the BEU. So in a weird way, he did create green power. But what was lost was the idea that it could be done collectively. So you take someone like LeBron James, because you're in Akron, I want to use this example. You know, he's been so successful and so brilliant on the court and off, and there's so many great things you can say about what he's done. And through effort, hard work, sweat, and money, created the I Promise School in Akron. An amazing accomplishment. But then you take a step back from it and see that's just one school in one medium-sized city. It's like there is so much more that needs to be done.
Right.
And so, like, Jim Brown, and I think this is one of the lessons from his life that we need to take. It's like you can't do, as much of an individual as Jim Brown was, and as much as he frankly didn't like organizing necessarily with others collectively, that was not his bag at all. And we can talk about that because it affected his opinion about the civil rights movement, Dr. King, John Lewis. Like, he had very counterintuitive, let's say, opinions about these movements. But at the same time, he was what I would describe as being in the center or center right wing of the Black Power movement. That's why he was friends with Huey Newton. And a lot of people don't understand that, is that there was a left wing and a right wing of the Black Power movement. And the right wing believed very strongly, as Malcolm X believed, that you had to build up the economic base of the community, and you should not go hat in hand asking for integration from a racist society that doesn't want you anyway. That was the politics that had sway with a lot. That was Ali's politics in the early 60s. And that was Jim Brown's politics. And I mentioned the LeBron James stuff just because what's lost is that idea of the collective. And Jim Brown did understand in the 1960s that if there was going to be economical uplift, it would in fact have to be organized, and it would have to be for profit.